Please welcome to the stage, Todd Conklin.
Sorry, that's what that was.
So your watch tells you have a text?
It does. It's amazing. It actually doesn't really tell me anything. It actually makes a little beep, not really beep, but bell sound. And then I know, hey, wow, there's something going on.
But it doesn't come on the face of your watch?
It does, but only like when I twist my arm in a certain way. You can't see this in the podcast. But I'm twisting my arm to demonstrate.
Which I think how can I say this? If you did this alone on a plane, they might kick you off. Oh, Ron, you are so interesting. Hi, everybody. It's Todd Conklin, the Pre-Accident Podcast. Glad you're here. It is awfully good to talk to you again today. And as you can tell already by the introduction to this, if you didn't recognize the voice, that's the effervescent Ron Gantt and I sitting around chatting. And Ron's a part of today's podcast, so you're going to get to hear a much longer, not too long, I'm not saying it's too long, but a much longer conversation with Ron and I as we roll through the podcastiness as fall greatly approaches us. It happened. The seasons just zoom by. I know it's boring talking about them, but it's the weather's. It's just an important part of how I hang out. It's what happens. It's the essence of New Mexico, which you're all invited to visit if you want to. It's wide open. We're welcoming you. Balloon Fiesta this year was great fun. So they had a great time. 1,200 balloons at the Mass Ascension. That is a lot of hot air, as is the podcast. Oh, thanks. I'm here all day. So now things are good. Fall's really a great time, and I'm having fun and getting ready to do all sorts of exciting stuff. Bob and I and Andrea are going to China to do a workshop. That should be fun. And roll up Workplace Fatality. It's printed in Chinese. So that book is out there in Chinese right now in the world for people to read. 1 billion people plus, maybe. I'm not sure they'll all read it. Don't get me wrong. Probably half of them will. So what is that? That's 500 million, 800 million, something like that. That'd be half the Chinese population. They'll be on it. They'll be reading it like crazy. Yeah, it's just a matter of time, you guys. We're going to take over the world. What else? I'm reeling from a comment on that stupid LinkedIn thing where I don't really understand what we do LinkedIn for, really. It seems like a place where people troll other people to say how stupid they are. And there's a comment where a guy, you might have seen it, I don't know, it's a lady who's driving a train and she's texting and she hits the back of the train in front of her. And, it's an accident. It's a pretty significant accident. It's a train. So, and there's two ways to look at that. You can say that she's a bad train driver, which is true. I mean, probably. Or that the system itself is so fragile that when a distracted driver gets that close to the train in front of them, there's no other secondary systems to sort of snap her out of her complacency or stop the train or, there's the two ways we look at stuff. We've had this conversation 9 million times. So they showed the video and a guy wrote a really nice comment about how, air's normal and blaming this train operator is emotionally satisfying and will immediately fix this problem but won't provide long-term solution. And some guy writes back and calls the guy a liberal douchebag, which if the conversation starts with that it's going to be interesting. He's a construction safety manager in Virginia. Clearly, this is taken this wild turn. That was the start of the comment. And then from there on, he proceeded to just take this poor guy down. And it wasn't me. I mean, I'm not even a part of this, right? I'm just reading it. But it's so frustrating to me that it went to such a level so quickly, and the desire the guy had to fully not only blame the person who was operating the train and texting, but to blame the person who made the LinkedIn post as if that was really a part of this giant conspiracy to actually remove responsibility from workers. And I don't even know how to have this conversation anymore, especially when it starts with the phrase, "You're a liberal douchebag." I don't know where we're going to go. I mean, I would grant you everything is up from there. There's hardly much down left, but holy crap, when people push that hard to ensure, in fact, accountability is held at the worker level, they've already lost the battle. That battle's done. I mean, they'll never punish their little construction company in Virginia into good behavior. They will hide every single piece of information that guy doesn't want to see away from that guy every time it'll happen. And I don't know, it's on my mind. And it happens all the time, it's crazy. I just want to say we can get along. I mean, I promise you, life is too short and the world's too amazing to spend time calling each other liberal douchebags. But it's just the wrong approach. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. So there. So that's it. So, okay, so I got that done. Cleanse the palate there. Ooh, shot a little emotional bile into the conversation. And now we can talk about Ron, because this podcast is fun. So this podcast is a pretty interesting discussion on what it takes if you decide to go ahead and get a graduate degree in safety. And Ron's going to talk about sort of his doctorate journey and what he's researching. That's what I was interested in. That's what started the whole conversation. But you're going to really get a feel for what a journey this is. And I actually think it's fun. And it's a great the conversation is fun. I think the journey's fun too. It's a lot of work and there's lots going on. But it's worth you sitting and just enjoying, just be kind of a fly on the wall and enjoy the conversation that Ron and I are having, because it's pretty fun. Anytime you can spend time with Ron Gantt, it's positive. I mean, he's hilarious, and hilarious is a good thing to be, if you ask me. He is a very, very interesting guy, and he has lots of interesting things to say, and that's what we're about to enjoy. So until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy the musings of graduate student Ron Gantt as he talks about his program and what he's doing and the research he's thinking about. It's interesting. You'll enjoy it.
So, Ron Gantt, what are you up to now? Just update us where you are sort of on your journey.
So where am I on my journey? I'm just trying to figure everything out still. Right now I'm really, really busy trying to finish school. That's one thing I'm very busy doing. And trying to figure out this thing we call drift. Beyond that, I'm also trying to figure out how do we operationalize this thing that we call the New View in other ways.
So talk to me about, and let's talk about both those things because they're great, but talk to me about grad school. So what's the benefit of grad school? Are you glad you chose to do it? I mean, maybe is this the wrong time to ask? No, it's never a good time to ask that question, I know. I mean, it is after it's over. It's a great time to ask the question after it's over. But your journey around grad school and this safety idea, how's that been?
So it's actually been good. And it's painful. You know, like I explained, you know, getting a PhD is like boot camp for nerds. But to me, the valuable part about it is you get to push yourself farther, and if you're doing it right, get to push the overall knowledge base farther, which, you know, the body of knowledge within the industry and within academia. So it's really forcing me to look at what we are talking about within HOP and whatever in new ways.
Yeah, the whole idea of implications for further research is a really important part of writing the book report, the dissertation part of it. How's the research going, and what are you looking at, and what are you finding, and how much help are you getting from other people? I mean, what's going on there?
So it's going really well. If you asked me about 9 months ago, I'd say it was hell on earth. But now I took some time away and cleared my head a little bit, and I'm coming back to it, and I feel actually much more inspired with it. And so I'm focusing on organizational drift. I want to understand more about what it is because it's a term we throw around a lot, and I don't know that we have a clear idea of what we mean when we say it. And then ultimately, if we can, figure out what it is, find ways to deal with it in some way, shape, or form.
Who coined the phrase organizational drift?
Well, that's actually a tough one to answer because the term sort of just started appearing in the literature. If you look at like sociology literature, even in IT, there's like early references to literally that term organizational drift in like the early 90s. The first time it really appeared in the safety literature is probably with Scott Snook's Practical Drift, and then into like David Wood's Drift into Failure. He talked about that, and then subsequently Sydney. You can see like the hints of it earlier than that, but nobody really called it drift in the safety world until.
So what are you looking at? How do you research that? I mean, the lit review I think would be super interesting because you can step out of the field. But what are you looking at exactly?
So one of the things I want to do is there's a quote from Sidney Dekker in the first Resilience Engineering book where he says something to the effect of maybe instead of accident models, we need a model of normal work. And so thinking of drift as a product of normal work, as adaptation within normal work, I decided to take a step back away from the idea that, drift is failure and things like that, and just, okay, how can we model normal work and how work changes over time, and how can we understand that? And so I'm creating a model of what I believe will basically describe how work changes and what are the factors that drive that change.
What's that model look like?
3 boxes. It looks like your laundry over there. Is that...
The ice machine's going crazy on us. I don't know what's going on, but it's going crazy.
No, so basically there's 3 elements to it that iterate over time. So the first element is context, right? And I'm coming at this from actually a sociological lens more than anything. And so by context, I'm kind of using theories from Giddens. I don't know if you've heard of structuration theory. But basically rules, resources, and I'm using the kind of catch-all term culture, which I'm not crazy about, but I'm just using it for now. I might come up with something different to basically describe the sorts of social structures that influence people's, kind of actions in a given environment. Those things interact to create work is done, right? Work is done then leads to sense making, and that's, even though I'm kind of saying that in like a linear sense, it's obviously not linear. There's sense making that's happening as work is happening, but it basically, by the time people finish the job, they have to take a step back and say, okay, what happened? They don't really necessarily say this consciously, but there's an understanding that what we did was good or what we did was bad, and we should do that again in the future. Those 3 elements then, and particularly the sense-making piece, then create a new set of context for the next iteration.
Where are you going for the sense-making literature? Is that coming out of sociology as well?
A little bit, but actually I'm probably going to lean a lot on like Carl Weick, sense-making in organizations, to kind of help me understand that piece of it. But I think there's actually some interesting things that you can draw on even within sociology, like particularly like social networks. It's like one of the hypotheses that I think I'm playing with is to understand how different types of social networks can influence drift, because drift has to be a social thing. If one person deviates from an action one time, it's not drift. For it to become ingrained within the system, that means a group of people have to in some way agree, and I'm going to put agree in air quotes because it doesn't necessarily have to be like a formal, hey, let's talk about this and come to an understanding. But there has to be some sort of routine that is developed that, okay, yeah, this is how we do it this time, and then subsequently maybe change it in the future. And so I think there might be ways to track how that social network, how the information diffuses through the social network. So you can even look at like stuff like diffusion of innovation to see how that sense-making piece moves throughout the system.
God, that's brilliant. You could use Rogers' diffusion curve. God, that would be really interesting, actually, because you would really probably have early adopters, and you'd clearly have laggards. I mean, you'd clearly have people that would drag their feet. The interesting part of the diffusion curve for this, at least on first blush, is the whole middle of it that just kind of merrily moves along. That's really interesting. Wow.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm really excited about it because I think it leads to a lot of interesting hypotheses. So first, from academic perspective, it's interesting. But from a practical perspective, I think if we can start to identify how this information and this sense-making moves through the social structure, we may be able to find new ways to identify this in real time. Not in real time per se, but in a more actionable sense, right? It's not just something we identify after an accident happens, but we can actually give people things to look for. Hey, if you see these sorts of social structures or networks or these sorts of conditions in the context, you're more likely to have drift, not drift. Not that drift is a bad thing per se. I don't want to give that impression, but I think it can lead to some of those things.
But it's an organizational phenomenon, or it's co-created in the process of doing work, probably. Fair enough? I mean, is that fair enough? So what are you looking at? So you're doing the lit review. That's pretty interesting. Literature review, for those of you that don't know what lit review means. Then what's the RQ? What's your research question going to look like? What are you kicking around in your head?
Well, so the research question is, first, is this model actually predictive of change, right? So does the model that I'm developing actually explain kind of change within a set of routines? There's actually some interesting research from some organizational theorists on routines where they describe two different aspects of routines. One is the performative aspect, or what we would call work is done. The other one's called the ostensive aspect, and that's basically how people talk about and think about the routine. And I think that's kind of where the sense-making piece comes in. And I think the thing that really I'm interested in is, I think as drift shifts, we like to think of it as a shift in work is done. I actually think of drift more as a shift as work is imagined, and that's how we actually identify it. Now, the interesting thing about that, and the part that is sometimes hard for people, is we think of it as work is imagined, work is done. I think I would rather talk about it in terms of like Steve Schirach's different varieties of work, where he has work is prescribed, work is imagined, work is done, and work is disclosed. And so work is prescribed doesn't change. The black line doesn't really change. But when drift happens, we create a new way that that work crew is thinking about the work. And I think my research question is that really happening? Does the work crew actually have a different conception, a different model of how that work's being done? Does that make sense?
Totally, based upon context, based upon what's happening when the work's being done. It seems like that would be, that's going to be interesting, because it seems like that would be relatively normal phenomena. You could see that probably in everything. So that's really interesting. And I think if you add the other two dimensions to that, so especially work as talked about, or work as exposed, or whatever sexy word you want to use there. I mean, because I do think people, the question I would have, and it'd be interesting to see in your research, I think people do more than they know they do, and they perform more than they think they performed. So, and how much of that is sort of an automatic reaction to stimuli that you don't even realize you did that, but you did it, could be really interesting to discover at some point. Is this interesting? So, is your committee interested in what you're looking at? I mean, have you picked your committee yet?
Yeah, I have a committee, and they're overall interested. I mean, it helps that Ivan Popoliti is on my committee, so he's interested. And then I've got a few others on the committee who are relatively interested. I'm not sure that all of my committee is as interested. I'm in an engineering program, and they're not, in general, as comfortable with the idea that I'm really relying on sociology for this, but that's the way that cookie crumbles.
Well, yeah, I don't think you want your committee to be too interested. That seems like that would be really negative. You want to remember that you're the expert. No one in the world knows more about this topic than you do. And you kind of have to manage your committee nicely and politely. Bring good refreshments. That's always a key, right? But you want to sort of tell them this is what you need to think, and this is how you need to think about it. And just know that no one will know more about this than you do. I mean, that's a pretty valuable part of it. So what's the timeline look like? When you be done?
Well, assuming everything goes according to plan, end of next year, most likely.
The only good book report is a done book report. You know that, right? It's not your life's greatest work. It just needs to be finished. That's really a key thing because it's hard to finish it. Do you have any good stalling strategies that you don't know about? Like I learned to play dobro instead of writing my dissertation because it was more fun to learn how to play dobro than it was to write my dissertation.
Well, I mean, so I don't play dobro, but no, I mean, my stalling strategies are, I don't know, I get distracted reading other stuff, or I've got stupid, like, games I play on my phone sometimes that distract me. I also have a new puppy, and she's pretty damn distracting, too. So.
But that's a good kind of distraction, so that's a part of it. What about work-wise? What are you seeing in the community? What should we be paying attention to? You're kind of an early adopter. You're a leader in the field. You're the guy. You're the man. What are you looking at? What do you care about now?
One of the things that's really, really interesting and important to me, and I kind of happened upon this in my research on drift, is the idea that I'm interested in the idea of learning in general. One of the things I really want to focus in on is how do we embed this learning that we're getting from things like learning teams and whatnot into the organization so that we can actually take advantage of it. There's a term I came across in the innovation literature called absorptive capacity, and it's the ability for an organization to identify and take advantage of information. Now, in the innovation literature, they mean it in terms of take advantage of external information, right? So, you know, product information, consumer information. But I think we can actually mold it and take it and look at it internally and use some of the things that they've found in that literature that actually increase the ability for an organization to learn and use it to not just learn externally, but learn from itself.
Do some organizations have more absorptive capacity than other organizations?
Yeah, so there's some interesting research on what are the things that increase an organization's absorptive capacity. Now, some of that is, one of the things they've done is they've separated absorptive capacity into two types. They call it potential and realized. Potential is we gather the information. So imagine you just did a learning team, right? So we've got all this interesting information about the organization or about a particular task or whatever. But then we got to actually do something with it, and so realized absorptive capacity. And so they identify things like in the potential absorptive capacity side, organizations that have psychological safety, organizations that have a leadership structure that encourages people to bring up concerns and issues, organizations that allow more autonomy. Those have a better opportunity to identify stuff. On the realized side, organizations that have the ability to take that learning and put it into an existing sort of structure to create change and take advantage of it. It's I don't mean bureaucracy per se, but some sort of actual process to actually do something with it, whether it's the workers going out and fixing it or, for bigger changes, moving it into the organization's processes. Something like that has to happen. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I actually think this is super interesting because I would guess organizations have different levels of I can't even say it, absorptive capacity. But I would think actually realizing that, sort of closing the deal on that, is probably the biggest challenge. I mean, I don't know. I'd be really curious if they could assess how much capacity an organization has to take in new information. I mean, I don't know if organizations are like people, it seems like on the surface that it would be limitless, but in reality, I imagine it's quite limited by lots of things, agendas and what they want to hear and how much they can handle truth. And so all these biases would be really strong in that as well. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, to your point, pre-existing mental models, and even when you look at the organizational learning literature, something that we don't talk a lot about is organizational forgetting. That's an important part of learning, right? Because you have to get rid of old models that aren't serving you anymore, old beliefs, old ways of doing things, and if there's no process to allow that to happen, then you're not going to be able to learn. Those biases will take over.
Well, I think organizations believe solutions are permanent, right? And they think once we solve this problem, we'll never have to solve it again. But in reality, organizations are constantly reinventing themselves. They're constantly changing. The context alone is changing. The market's changing. Technology, for God's sakes, is changing. And so probably lots of processes, systems, practices, biases, traditions have had to go away. And how you get an organization to purposely forget something, that would be pretty interesting. I don't know. That sounds like you could have a second PhD.
It'd be Dr. Ron.
Doctor. Who are you going to call you doctor?
I'm going to save that one for just that special jerk that I find, who, I don't know, cuts me off on the freeway or something like that, or, and then I happen to see him at the coffee shop later or something like that. But other than that, no.
He'll have to call you doctor. Yeah. Where are you going to hang your diploma? That's the big question. Right? You've never been to my house, but my diploma hangs in my guest bathroom.
I'm going to hang my diploma in your guest bathroom.
That's really where it hangs, in my guest bathroom.
That's awesome. I have no idea. Like, step one is to actually finish the damn thing, and then I'll, I figure then I can write a new dissertation on where to hang it.
You're right. I am getting the cart a little bit ahead of the horse, so you do have to finish it. But when you're finished, let me highly recommend your guest bathroom, because it's as good a place as any. Your office seems snooty and kind of pretentious. Yeah. But the guest bathroom, that's giving it to where the people live.
That's the best place to put it, for sure, man. Where else would you put it, for crying out loud?
Kitchen seems wrong. Living room's just weird.
Yeah, no.
I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe hanging above, like, the bed in the guest bedroom.
There you go. A place of honor. The crappy mattress that used to be yours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a good place for it.
Final words to anybody? What are you thinking?
Well, no. If anybody is interested in being involved in the research at all, let me know. Reach out. I could always use an organization to partner with.
So you're really looking at practicing this in so using these models on a real organization. Yeah. Oh, actually, let's say that again. That's really good. What are you looking for? What characteristics?
So, in general, anything. But the ideal is, in thinking about the time frame I want to complete it in. I think an ideal would be an organization that's whether it's a construction company, large general contractor, or an oil and gas facility that's going through a big maintenance shutdown, turnaround, something like that. That is starting, probably towards the beginning of next year, because something like that will have a high level of complexity and risk, and will have a lot of work happening in a short period of time. So there's a lot of data points.
There we go, you guys. That's our challenge. Thanks, Ron. Anything close out, like pithy final thing, like don't ever eat anything bigger than your head or something like that?
Don't squat with spurs on.
And there you have it. That is the conversation between Ron and I. And if you're interested in getting some advice and help from Ron along the way, perhaps you'd be the right place to volunteer for Ron to do his work, his applied use of his research. It could work, you guys. It's not a bad idea. And actually, it's a great idea, if you have to ask me. And it'd be a great way to kind of pump in some new analysis. I'd actually kind of call it kind of a new way to see the world, a new vantage point, a new perspective. That's the word I'm looking for, a new perspective into your system. And that may be valuable, bar none. So, if you're interested, Ron's contactable, he says. You can contact him. He's contactable. And that'd work well, too. And our bumper music, the music between the interview, I want to thank my friend Annabelle Yeston. That's her new song that she just wrote. And I got a bootlegged copy of it, and I thought I'd put it in, the podcast. And then for a treat, I'll give you a full version at the end of the podcast. But I think that's about what we got to talk about today. I think we're pretty much done, don't you? You feel like we did a good day? Was this good? Are you almost at work? Are you through walking the dogs? You got it all done? Good. I hope so. Learn something new every single day. Have as much fun as you possibly can. And for goodness sakes, you guys, be safe. Oh, I can't even say it. I screwed up my own thing. Be safe.
You gotta learn how to pay your dues. Hey, little sister, you gotta see this through. My eyes are the world just singing for you. Hey, little sister, I'm talking to you. It's time to stand up and put on some shoes. That's right, that's what they were paid you to do. Believe me, darling, if you snooze, you lose. 1, 2, 3 little birds are telling me not to get hurt. If you walk on fire, you might get burned. But if you dance on the flame, I swear you'll go insane. Little sister, I'm talking to you. You gotta learn how to pay your dues. Little sister, you gotta see this through. On the other side of the world, just singing for you. Little sister, you gotta stay humble and run for you. Try not to mumble. Little sister, gotta promise me one thing, 'cause you learn to love yourself. 'Cause if you don't, nobody will love you. Little sister, I'm talking to you. You gotta learn how to pay your dues. Hey, little sister, you gotta see this through. I'm on the other side of the world, just singing for you. Just singing for you. Singing for you.
That's Annabelle Yeston and her song Little Sister, available on Annabelle Records.